right, welcome to Please Be Seated, another episode of our podcast, and I've got with me Alex Ransom, and if you're not following her on social media, you should be. It's very interesting, typically, what you're talking about. Not for the faint of heart, but well researched, and so many people today aren't, and I think that's something that's interesting to me. So all we want to talk about today, really, I mean, I'm going to ask you your opinion on some other things, but let's just talk a little bit about your history with researching vaccines. Let's start there, because didn't just start with coronavirus.
Well, my history with researching vaccines goes actually back into researching the differences between allopathic and holistic medicine, but that's because I study holistic medicine.
Right.
So I think we all have had an experience where we've had to advocate for ourselves within allopathic medicine, dealing with insurance companies, referrals, specialists. So when you go through that yourself and you go into it kind of like questioning their treatments and what you're putting into your body, that's where it starts.
Sure. So it starts with this, for lack of a better word, skepticism, because you want to make sure that they're not practicing on you, in a sense, because we know that that's part of it.
Well, I have firm beliefs in holistic medicine. I don't discredit allopathic medicine, but I take issue with how allopathic medicine discredits what I believe in, which is holistic medicine.
Right.
So that's where the skepticism comes from.
Okay.
As far as vaccines particularly, I want to say I pinpointed that when Eli, my husband, started working with kids with autism, and we started hearing these repeated stories of parents saying it was like a switch was flipped.
Wow.
So my kids were vaccinated, but this raised questions. Well, like, why are parents saying this?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it started. But when you're already questioning and you're researching pharmacology and you're researching one versus the other, as far as chemical medicine and natural medicine, you already have your wheels turning as far as what is best for our organic vessel.
Sure.
It's not always chemicals.
Right. Rarely,
yeah.
So this is just kind of an opinion question for you. I know that, scientists have been working on a SARS vaccine for a decade at least. And then we see, hospitals dedicated to certain types of illnesses.
Right.
In each facility employing, thousands of people. Why this disease? Why the vaccine for this one so fast, in your opinion? And, when the survival rate is up over 99% in most places that you read, why this? Why this particular scenario with COVID?
In my opinion, this scenario with COVID is because a coronavirus is highly communicable. So there's the fear of we're all potentially going to get it. Right. We've seen flus come and go, and you always hear people say, I got the flu, I've never got the flu, I've got the shot, never got the shot. But with a coronavirus, you're dealing with a set of viruses that are highly communicable. We've been adapting to them for a long time, but how many people didn't know what a coronavirus was until last year?
Right.
Yeah,
and there it is, right on the package of the Lysol wipes, and it's been there for years.
Yes.
Because coronavirus has been around.
Right. There's literature, as I was mentioning earlier, that dates back 11 years. That there's a publication that came from the Rockefeller Foundation where they specifically talk about how a coronavirus can be used in a pandemic. It's scenarios for an industrialized future is the main point. They're giving a playbook with 3 different scenarios. One of them is Lockstep, which is literally 2020 in a nutshell.
Wow.
It was published in 2010.
No, you're talking about documents from, in this case, the Rockefeller Foundation. That is a globalist playbook, so to speak. So this isn't a big secret. It's been out there for at least a decade.
Right, at least, yeah. And they've actually been studying vaccines for a coronavirus for close to 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Safety and efficacy in all of the previous animal trials failed 100%.
Wow. And this vaccine had the way I understand it, had no human trials. Is that true?
No, it had a 44,000 human trial last year.
Okay.
In a very short amount of time. They followed the subjects for 7 days. There was very little variance in the subjects as far as pre-existing conditions, age. We know that they didn't study it on pregnant women, breastfeeding. So now we're seeing all these reports to VIIRS that state women have miscarried.
That were in that trial?
They were not
population?
in that trial. They're in the current human trial.
I gotcha. Yeah. Which is everybody who's getting
it.
The vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is interesting because it seems like there's so much of it that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. You know, it's something that most people are going to recover from, like the flu, and I know people say this is conspiracy, but if it's what's happening, then is it conspiracy?
Right.
Because it's been used as a tool to close down our economy, to put us in a subservient position to people like China, and I mean the government, not necessarily the people, but just to get us on our back foot, so to speak. And, you know, now we're sending people, you know, $1,400 and expecting that's going to fix it all.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line, and again, this is my opinion, it's been a globalist agenda all along. There's information on the Department of Justice that talks about arrests that were made in the beginning of all of this, where we're linking biochemical warfare being transported from Harvard to the lab in Wuhan that's across the street from the meat market. I mean, this is information people can... It's there if you're looking.
Right.
But the globalists know the common person is not going to look.
Right.
They're going to watch the news. They're going to watch CNN, Fox News, mainstream media, and they're going to follow the narrative that we're being told. They're not going to ask these questions that we're talking about.
What's curious to me is that in the information age, when so much is available, they still know most people won't look.
Exactly.
Or they'll think it's just too far-fetched to believe.
Right.
And, you know, so I think that, you know, if anybody's ever heard of the show on Netflix called Don't F with Cats.
Right. I watched that. I did watch that.
So I've not watched it all, but I did watch, because that kind of thing is interesting to me. I think of people like Andrew Breitbart, and I think of people like Matt Drudge, where these guys only became famous because they broke stories that the mainstream media wouldn't touch.
Right.
It was Monica Lewinsky for Drudge, and then I believe it was the Anthony Weiner thing for Breitbart. And then these guys just blew up, and now Breitbart News is one of the most trustworthy voices in America, simply because it's not whitewashed by the mainstream media. And then Drudge, of course, has become a force, in the media. So I think there's room, and then you couple that with Don't F with Cats, there's room, I think, for the citizen sleuth here.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a medical doctor. You don't have to be. In fact, that's probably a bigger hindrance these days for you finding the truth if you were a medical doctor, because you've been conditioned not to perhaps question that, and so many people aren't going to get out of that societal framework.
If Bill Gates can push a vaccine on the population of the world, and he's not a doctor, then I can do my personal research and not be a doctor. And the research comes from the experts.
Right.
And what's interesting is they say listen to the doctors, listen to the science, but they only want to give you the doctors and the science to listen to. There's doctors around the globe that have personal studies with they stand to gain no profit from vaccination whatsoever. They're independent laboratories. They're doing their own studies on the virus and the vaccine, and their findings are contrary to what we're being told.
Right.
And that's not in the main.
And nobody's listening to those.
Nobody's listening to them. They're being discredited. They get discredited by PolyFact, Snopes, and these are people who are just regular people that get paid by somebody to sit in a room probably like this and just say
it's not true.
This isn't true.
Yeah. Well, Snopes, in my opinion, this is not my opinion. This is truth. Snopes is looked at as the authority if you want to know if something's true or not, and it's a left-wing think tank.
Right.
And all they do is guard, what their own position is,
Yeah.
essentially. And that, to me, it leads into this bigger thing, because anybody coming forth with the truth these days is likely going to lose their job at least, and maybe their entire livelihood,
Yes.
at worst, and be,
Yeah.
pushed out of wherever they're at, at the highest levels. So I think it's a very daunting time for freedom.
Right.
In America. Of course, we're expecting God to move mightily in the midst of
Right.
chaos, which
Yes.
he always does. But from a citizenry, human being level, people are, rushing to believe this. Like I heard one guy say, I think it was a video that I saw on your site, what if the same guy that told us masks is what you need to do, and then he said, no, you don't need to, and then you do,
Right.
several times, and then a year after saying that mask is the thing, said, well, now you need 2 masks.
Right. Which to me is admission that the one mask didn't work this whole time.
In the first place.
Right.
Well, it also makes me wonder, what if everybody takes the vaccine and it's like, oh, wow, you shouldn't have done that.
Right. Well, that's the thing with the vaccine is it's a continuous replication of the spike protein of the virus in your body. What happened in the animal trials, when the bodies were introduced to the live pathogen, there was this immune response where it let it replicate unchecked. If you go to the doctor and they give you a new medication and you have an adverse reaction and you go back and say, this caused this neurological symptom,
Right.
they tell you to discontinue. Well, when we're seeing these adverse reactions with the vaccine, you can't discontinue.
You can't. It's in your body.
It's in your body, and it's a designer drug, so it's designed, programmed. Moderna actually refers to their vaccine as software.
Wow.
To just continue replicating in the body for the rest of your life.
And Moderna, just to be clear, was founded by Fauci. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true.
So they call that almost like a computer chip. They call it a program.
It's more, they do. It's more like if you're using that analogy, it's more like a 3D printer. So it's pre-programmed. Okay. They insert it into you. I mean, the technology that we're seeing in science right now, it really is unprecedented. It's groundbreaking, and if you fully believe in it, which most people do, you want to say that it's credible. Where I've discredited it is when I follow the money. Right. When you're following the studies that are done and the studies that are published and given to the public, you can buy science.
Right.
Just like you could buy a lot of things.
Sure, yeah.
So to me, a lot of the studies they're very biased because they are done by the people who stand to gain profit from the outcome. Somebody's
commissioning those studies or those reports.
Right.
And they're going to be favorable to those people paying them.
Yeah. Right now, Sloan Kettering, they got involved. Their cancer research, most people are familiar with who they are, but they found that they did groundbreaking studies that show, a lot of people think that because in our bodies we actually produce cancer cells, our body kills them,
right?
And it comes from the DNA. That's what we've been told for decades,
right?
Whoever knows how long. What they discovered was that these cancer changes are actually found in RNA, which is a layer between our DNA and our body that produces proteins. Now, some of the proteins that our body makes are tumor prohibitors. Like they stop tumors from growing in our body. And what Sloan Kettering found, they're an independent laboratory, so they have no vestments in the vaccine whatsoever, is that the mRNA vaccine inactivates that protein that stops cancer from growing in our bodies.
The human body.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not published yet, but it is a completed study. Non-mainstream sources are reporting on it, but you'll probably never see it on CNN or...
Of course not, yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 of the vaccines of the 3 are... what do they call it? mRNA or...
mRNA.
Yeah.
There's 4 vaccines.
Okay.
There's the AstraZeneca from Oxford, which is that's an mRNA. Pfizer and Moderna, those are mRNA. Then Johnson & Johnson, I think they're actually using the older vaccine technology, which maybe is better. But when you look at Johnson & Johnson's track record of lawsuits and knowingly harming people
Right.
with
Yeah.
their medicines, to me, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
But even still, they're using live pathogen vaccination where the live pathogen itself has never been isolated, which some people will understand why that's important, why that's not, but that's a whole other.
Yeah.
It
never
has,
been isolated.
It has not been isolated. So how did, like, what is in that vaccine? How did they formulate that vaccine? How did they manufacture it? And right now, even the ingredients list to the vaccine is very obscure. They're not really being transparent about that.
Well, if you don't have to be, then why should you? I suppose, right?
They're
well,
running
and the
out
government
getting
is forcing people, in a sense, to get the vaccine,
Right.
Because you can't. It's funny to me that a friend of mine just made tickets to plane tickets to Mexico, and on the return flight, it said you had to be tested for COVID.
Right.
But yet, I'm guessing, tens of thousands of people coming into this country every day from other countries. Illegally, legally now, because they're letting them in, that aren't tested.
Exactly.
So I don't get it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've never understood about the test itself is that they have to take a 10-inch long thing up your nose into your barrier between, your blood-brain barrier.
Right.
And why is that if obviously the virus is in your mouth because you've got to wear a mask over your mouth.
Right.
So much of what they can do now is just swab your mouth. Why is that? Why do they have to go all the way up into your brain, basically?
There's a lot of tests being done that are just saliva tests. But there's, again, research. You can look on the National Institute of Health's website and you can see what they're doing with the technology of those nasal inserts and how they're cleansing them. They're cleansing them with a carcinogen that turns into a powder. The studies are all public information. So essentially they're putting carcinogens in people's noses. And the same people that are manufacturing the tests, the vaccines, they're all the same companies. They're all umbrellaed by the same people.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if you get an illness from any of these procedures or medical treatments, testing, vaccine, you're in their pocket.
There's no recourse.
There's no recourse.
Because in 1986 or whenever it was, there was a law passed saying you couldn't hold pharmaceutical companies liable for reactions to vaccines. So what is the rate? And I suppose there's no real way of knowing because I'm sure some of this, like anything else, we saw so much of the COVID information being misreported, not reported, over-reported, under-reported, whatever. You could talk about, the governor of New York and all of that, and the nursing homes. So, how many people are dying from this vaccine?
Well, that 44,000 person study that was done, I think it was Pfizer that provided that vaccine to the FDA and the CDC, and that was just so they could say, hey, we have a study. It wasn't really an accurate study, but that was just to get the emergency use authorization. So right now the vaccine it's not licensed or FDA approved technically. It's just under emergency use authorization. The CDC posted to their website that in that study, 2% of people had life-altering reactions to the vaccine, whether it be life-altering means that they can no longer function in a normal capacity. So they probably can't work. It's probably neurological or death. They put it all in altogether.
So there's no way of knowing, but
it's 2%, which is 2 times the amount of
800 people roughly
COVID mortality.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's twice the amount of. So you stand a better chance of just having the illness than having the vaccine.
Yeah.
And that was with the early trial. Who knows what that number is now because
that was based on that one trial.
Right.
So when we look at VAERS, which is their vaccine adverse reaction reporting system, people basically have to report their own adverse reactions.
So,
It's a kind of a poor tracking system in my opinion. But even still, they by admission of the FDA and the CDC, it only accounts for 1% of injuries. And since people have been getting vaccinated in November, it is just piling up page after page. And some of those entries are very minor because some people are actually reporting the fever and sore arm, which you should expect from a vaccine.
Any vaccine.
But some of these other reactions that we're seeing that are neurological, which there's an explanation for why that's happening, they're normalizing it in the medical community.
Right.
But that is literally your body communicating to you that you have put something in there that does not belong.
Right.
But they're just saying, oh, well, it's a normal side effect. These are not normal side effects.
Right. So let's just say, I mean, I know there's a lot of people like me who don't want to get the vaccine, who, were wondering, what do you do for your body then? How do you strengthen your immune system?
Well, diet is the main thing, which
right.
we don't talk about in America because the SAD diet, standard American diet, is sad. But there's research that's available on vitamin D. A link between vitamin D deficiency, which covers about 90% of Americans, is they see more severe cases and a higher mortality in COVID cases because of vitamin. There's a definite link between vitamin deficiency and severity of COVID. So it responds really well to vitamin uptake as far as vitamin D. There's treatments available. Those have been suppressed because if you have a treatment for an illness, you cannot have a vaccine. The only way that they can produce a vaccine is if there's no treatment for something, a communicable disease.
I see.
There are treatments that are available. That would probably be a whole other podcast.
Right.
But they're available in other countries. They're using them in Japan. And Japan, when they switched from the American method of venting people, telling them there's nothing else we can do, to these treatments, they reduced hospitalizations by 90%.
Wow.
So you can imagine what that looked like for mortality.
Sure, exactly.
But like my arsenal at home is vitamin D, magnesium, N-acetyl-L-cysteine. It's abbreviated to just NAC, which helps keep infection from going into the lungs. Aspirin, because there's definitely a coagulation aspect to COVID. It causes some clotting, which is interesting because some of the reactions with the vaccine are basically that. People are dying of strokes after getting their second vaccination.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, we talked a little bit before we started airing about China's virus passport, and now they're asking the World Health Organization to allow them to run the global initiative for a passport, a vaccine passport. And I think of, in order to go to Africa to do ministry, you have to have yellow fever.
Right.
And it's good for 10 years, and you have to have a little yellow card and carry it with you, or they won't let you in the country or on the continent. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think about that, number one? And number two, for me, I certainly miss the past presidential administration who basically told the World Health Organization to take a hike.
Right.
And now it seems like we want to prove so much that we're in lockstep with the global approach to everything, that China could end up enforcing things on us that they enforce on their own citizens.
Right.
And so there's just a lot of scary things, on the horizon. So what do you think about a passport, first of all, and then the thoughts that China may be enforcing that?
Well, for me, I've been well aware of a globalist agenda for a long time, and I've been talking about it for a long time, and I've been a conspiracy theorist for a long time. So none of it's shocking to me, but I think that they first instill this fear, which is it's a psychological attack.
It's irrational.
Yeah, and they know that. They know. They use, our government has used Joseph Goebbels' propaganda for decades. They know about the KGB studies that are specifically about psychological fear and how you can use it to control the masses. So most people are going to comply with this. They look at the World Health Organization as the World Health Organization. They look out for our
like
health.
Marcus Welby,
Right.
a television doctor from the 60s. Anything that comes out of
Right.
there, or even the CDC for that matter, people think it's gospel.
Yeah. So they're not going to say we're forcing the vaccine on you, but they're going to force it
Yeah.
through taking away liberties
Sure.
unless you have it little by little.
Right.
And people say, "Oh, that won't happen here." Well, we're seeing things happen here in the United States
Yeah.
that I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
Of course, yeah. I saw something on, I believe it was Breitbart the other day, this week though, of people in Hong Kong being shipped off to re-education camps in
Right.
China.
Right.
And they were on buses, and their loved ones were outside the bus, trying to reach them and take pictures of them and things like that. And it was chilling. It reminded me of seeing the boxcars full of Jews going
Right.
off to Auschwitz.
Right.
And the world stands by because the leverage now, I'm not sure what the leverage was in Germany's day other than just a hatred for the Jew. But now it's money.
Right.
And so China is just greasing all the right wheels and have patted the right, palms to keep our government silent,
Right.
our culture silent, essentially, for the most part. And this is just happening, and now they're potentially going to be some kind of a shot caller in American policy,
Right.
which I think is it's going to present some challenges.
It's definitely going to present some challenges. Well, you have this huge movement of people that are awakened to this. That, like, I know for me personally, and you know me personally, I will fight it tooth and nail. Like,
Sure.
I don't lay my convictions down to make other people feel comfortable.
Exactly.
And I think that a lot of people are getting on that bandwagon more
Yeah.
so than before. Like, I'm not as weird as I used to be.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's
Not that I ever thought you were weird,
right, right.
but being somebody that's pretty vocal about my
Right.
positions, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So we're going to see asperity. Like, there's no doubt about that. But it's just navigating through that, I think, with your convictions, especially us as believers. Like, we can't, for me personally, I don't fear these things. I don't
Right.
worry about these things.
Yeah.
But I keep my awareness on
Right.
point for
Sure.
myself, for my family, and for those around me.
Right. Well, and we preach grace, hope, and love, but at the same time, like you say, we still are aware of things going
Right.
on that are
Right.
affecting human beings.
Yes.
And I think that we do need to have a voice in that space.
Yeah.
Because people don't really know what to think or what to do.
Right.
And I'm hoping that more people will become emboldened and realize that that you don't have to get the vaccine, or you don't
Right.
have to be bullied into certain things.
Right.
And we see now with the cancel culture and all of that. What's been interesting for me to discover in all of this, and I guess I just wasn't paying attention before, but that a prominent Democrat leader, at least former, is part of this movement against vaccines. And of course, I'm talking about Robert Kennedy Jr.
Right.
And I was introduced to his foundation. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but
Children's Defense.
Children's Defense
Yeah.
Organization. And I have a cousin who's a chiropractor and into holistic medicine and things like that. And he's the one that sort of pointed that out to me. But he's been canceled. He's completely off. I think he's been canceled off social
yeah.
media.
His
simply,
wife.
yeah, his wife, everything.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've empowered people now, and we've sort of hitched our wagon to this media infrastructure that
Right.
includes social media, and now it seems like they can willy-nilly call all the shots,
Right.
and just get rid of this dissenting voices. My hope in the near future is that people that are sane, that have money, are willing to put that money up,
Right.
and develop other infrastructure mechanisms where people can come together, communicate, organize,
Right.
and share ideas.
I think it's a possibility. it's navigating through the interwebs that are also kind of controlled because people have built their own platforms.
Yeah.
And then you have the people running the servers taking them down.
Right.
But underground movements always find a way. I mean, my
Always.
motto is truth always finds light.
That's right.
So even in a time of so much censoring and suppression, I am still getting filled with new information.
Right.
That's a servitude to good and to the truth.
Sure.
So I definitely think that that's a possibility. One thing I want to mention, just because people have a hard time wrapping their brain around how mainstream media works and why they have such a strong influence on health and politics, is back in 1936, ABC Radio was bought by Merck Pharmaceutical. They were a different pharmaceutical company then, but that's what they're known as today.
Okay.
And
so they became the parent company of ABC News.
That kind of dawned the age of the pharmaceutical industry owning our media. And if you follow the tracks of the because it's like a mother company of a mother company,
Sure.
It all goes back to a pharmaceutical company. And this happened because ABC Radio broadcasted, it was a Senate hearing where a doctor from Germany talked about how he found the cure for cancer and tuberculosis. And he had patients come that gave testimonies of how they were cured using his protocols. Merck Pharmaceutical came in, bought ABC Radio, made the broadcaster recant the story, and then fired him the next day. And
wow.
Now here we are.
Yeah. It's pretty insidious.
It is.
Well, it goes all the way back to a guy like Bill Gates. It's like, what is his claim to fame, except that in America we worship rich people, and we think that they must be so much smarter than us because they're so rich. And it's just I've never subscribed to that because
I haven't either.
There's a lot of ways people get rich, and it doesn't mean that they're brilliant, and it certainly doesn't mean that a guy like Bill Gates has any business at all, except for he stands to make lots of money,
exactly,
because he's invested in these the business side of these vaccines. It's so funny that people struggle so hard to realize that a church is a business. It's a nonprofit business, and we're usually pretty good at holding the line on nonprofit.
Right.
But it has to run to some similitude like a business, or it's not successful.
Yeah.
And I was told by a pastor one time, much older and experienced than me, that most pastors don't fail because they can't preach, but because they can't run a business. Well, it's also then now to make this quantum mental leap that a guy like Bill Gates is behind the business of medicine, the business of vaccines.
Yeah.
And so you have it here that again, globalists who, I still don't understand what the motivation is for them to be globalists, except for when the whole world is piled together, they still get to be in charge.
Exactly.
And they get to be the ones calling all the shots. So I think that as you start following the money on some of these things and realizing that there is more at play, because, unless former presidents are just genetically superior somehow, and maybe that they're aliens sent to America to be president.
Right.
From you name it, if Reagan didn't get Alzheimer's, he'd probably still be alive. So every one of these guys lives into their 90s. Even Reagan did, and he had Alzheimer's.
Right.
So how is it that they can keep these guys alive so long, other than the fact that I believe there is a cure for cancer?
Right. There's anti-parasitic drugs that they're $4 for a massive enough to treat a horse. That NIH says that they kill tumors. They work with apoptosis. They stop metastasis. But you don't hear about that because they cost $4 for 6,000 milligrams. Yeah, which is a plethora for a human,
Right. I'm surprised it's still even available. Still.
Right. But that, again, that drug does not make money. It's an anti-parasitic. It's, it doesn't have
We don't
the
have
pockets.
a big parasite issue, most people think, in America.
Well, they give it daily, like in places where that's an issue.
Sure.
And it's
bad drinking water and so forth. Yeah.
Right. But the studies show that these drugs are more groundbreaking than these neuro bioscience drugs that they're putting out. But when you think about that, those drugs make these people so much money, but you have to have the need. If people don't need medicine, you're not making the money. Right. So how do you get people to need the medicine? You have to make them ensure their sickness.
Yeah, you have to make them patients.
Right.
This is an issue I've had. Yeah, and I'm not anti-doctor. I have a great physician, family physician and all, but we don't always agree. And it goes back a decade or two, not that long, maybe 15 years, where the doctor I had at the time wanted to put me on Lipitor.
Right.
Because my cholesterol was, around 250.
Yeah.
Well, again, just with some cursory investigation, what I found was 50, now maybe 75 years ago, high cholesterol was anything over 300.
Right.
And now they want you under 120, and that's across the board. Forget about your body type. Forget about how big or small you are. They just want everybody at this, what amounts to an artificially low place that you can only get to by medication.
Right.
Because if you're dead, you're no use to me if I'm a physician.
Right.
And if you're well and don't need a physician, you're no good to me, because most of you aren't going to come for your yearly exam.
Right.
So I got to do something to get you connected to the pharmaceutical industry. And I know this sounds again like crackpot stuff, but I went to visit a chiropractor once when I was preaching in Oklahoma. And this was years ago. And so let's just say 12 years ago, he told me that at that time, and maybe it's different now, but at that time, Lipitor was the most prescribed drug in human history.
Right.
And the reason is what I just said, because they needed something like Lipitor to make cholesterol levels artificially low.
Right.
And so at this point, and my cholesterol is low just from better diet and exercise over the years, but they still want to put you on the Lipitor. And
it's a designer drug.
It's a designer
designed
drug
for your life. And
That's
when
right.
you look at the actual, when they study these drugs, I mean, how many drugs get pulled from the shelf? When we look at statin drugs, they are a huge hoax.
Yeah.
So you're addressing cholesterol, and maybe they work for that. But cholesterol involves your cardiovascular system. It involves your heart, which is a muscle, and statin drugs deplete muscle mass.
Yeah.
So you're creating, you're weakening the organ that is essential to this body system.
Right.
When you weaken that organ, then what? You stay sick.
Yeah.
Or you get sicker, or you get that.
Sure.
They've been linked
it causes
to
other problems.
Even cancer.
Yeah, cancer, heart disease, your kidneys will play out at some point because you're on drugs your whole life. Especially if they can start you on that stuff young. So I don't mean to say that all doctors are nefarious and they're trying to engineer. That's just how they think.
Well, I think doctors for the most part have good intentions.
Absolutely.
But they're governed by entities that have to follow a protocol that is handed down from pharmaceutical companies. So people always want to say, well, they're governed by the AMA. Okay, yeah, they're governed by the AMA. Who governs the AMA?
Right. Yeah.
I'll leave that as an open question.
Right.
People can research the answer to that question.
So now let's circle back, to use a popular phrase in the media these days. Let's circle back to the drug hydrochloroquine, because again, here's a drug that has been approved by the FDA for 70 years or whatever.
Right.
And the first time in that amount of time, a drug that's already approved was suddenly not allowed to be co-opted for a different illness than its primary purpose.
Right.
Because that's just something that happens,
Yes.
I know someone who recently had an issue with nerves in their face, and they were given a anti-seizure medication because it was a nerve blocker, and it helped that pain that person was experiencing. So my point is this: there were physicians who were losing jobs and being fired and being denigrated and being absolutely canceled from their careers and professions because they were insistent upon using hydroxychloroquine because they were seeing miraculous results.
Right.
And I think, and I'm not up on all the numbers in Africa, maybe you are, but Africa and places that use hydroxychloroquine for malaria, they were having almost they were having very low numbers
Right,
of COVID
right.
because they weren't getting it.
Yeah. Well, the Tanzanian president was on top of that from the beginning.
Yeah.
He wanted nothing to do with the vaccine, the tests, the
Right.
World Health Organization. They sent tons of tests.
Sure.
And he was sending them back tests that he took on fruits off of trees that were coming back positive and said, oh, there it is. We can't trust this science.
Right, right.
And he got...
Sure.
They
would have canceled him if they
totally.
could.
Right. But he's a president of a country.
Yeah.
Well, they canceled the president of our country, but that's a different.
That's right.
It's a different story.
Sure. Yeah. So tell me this: are you aware of this thing with Bill Gates where they vaccinated, thousands of people in Africa?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that story, because I don't know all the details of that.
The details are really expansive, but in a nutshell, Bill Gates uses the African people as guinea pigs. And there's tons and tons of information available about this. He comes in as a self-proclaimed savior.
Sure.
He literally reinvented himself as a philanthropist, which you can go back and look at his history. Crimes against humanity are his MO.
Yeah.
And he gets away with it because of money. So it's the children. And the problem is not just that they went in and vaccinated a bunch of kids. These are genetic disorders. So this is getting carried on from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. It's not just isolated to this group.
To who got the vaccine.
Right.
So just a big experiment, basically.
Yes.
And part of me believes that's what this is. It's just like, let's just see what's going to happen. I mean, if they really are globalists, which they are, and they don't want world population to get out of control, which they don't, just let people die if they've got COVID.
Right. Well, there's, again, those publications I spoke of earlier, they address depopulation. They address the benefits. The verbiage that they use, it's like selling points.
Sure.
They could almost sell you on it. Like,
this is a
good idea. This is why it makes sense. And you're kind of dehumanizing. You're unidentifying people as people.
It dates back to the Nazis.
Exactly.
You dehumanize people, and then you don't see them as people.
Right. So they make it sound good. They make it sound like, it's always trust the science. They make the science sound so good. But when you study the science and you understand the science, you read the science, and you follow the intentions of the science, it's usually not good. Not when it's coming from someone who's not a doctor. Not when it's coming from Bill Gates.
Sure. And people take that as just, again, like I said earlier, the gospel. Mm-hmm. Well, so here we are in the middle of year 2 of this pandemic, and suddenly now, the very month that everything was closing down last year, things are opening back up.
Right.
How do you think it's going to play out? Because I can't really get a sense or a feel on where they're going, because it seems to be a bit contradictory. You see some, of course, red states are open, economies are booming, but then the blue states are hunkering down, and still the sky's falling apparently. How do you see it all coming together, or will it?
Well, it's interesting when you put the political aspect on it of the red and blue.
Yeah.
You see that the people in the blue are the ones that are pushing the narrative on the rest of the people. Those are the ones that, for some reason, and I try not to throw that blanket over it, because
sure.
I personally don't put myself in a
in
definition of being one or the other, because I have pretty bipartisan views. But those people, like, if you keep the oppression in the blue states, you have the people that help you enforce it. Because who has more of an influence on you than a politician or a celebrity are the people that you're sharing space with. They're the people that are criticizing you to your face in a store if you're not following along with what they're saying. So I think to some extent they have to keep a certain level of fear in the general population to get people to go out, get the vaccine. There's still a threat. COVID's not over. Throw us a bone here and there, a stimulus check, open outdoor dining. They're just throwing us bones, but keeping us afraid.
Yeah.
So that
and very grateful to get a little
Exactly.
little piece
In
of
the
our
free
freedom
world.
back.
In the free world.
In the free world, we're so thankful for the benevolent government to let us
Right.
eat outside
Yeah.
while wearing masks.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we could talk all day about much of this stuff, and I'm sure we'll do it again at some point. But thank you for joining. Please be seated. Don't forget to subscribe and like and comment. And we'd love to see what you say and have to say and what you think about some of the stuff we talked about today. So bless you guys, and we'll see you soon right here.